This is not a review. If you want to know the comprehensive specs, the how this machine benchmarks...
Oh, it's gone now.
...and all the little intricate details, this isn't for you. Other people do that better on YouTube. There's no point in me trying to compete. But what no one else on YouTube quite is me. So, if you think you're like me, and you think this could be helpful in choosing whether you should buy this machine, then this video's for you. Because this is a really weird machine. It swooshes open, clicks apart, and for lack of any other fun onomatopoeia in my head right now, it has a fun vibe to it, you know? Hence my assertion in the last video that Microsoft, for discontinuing it, are a bunch of nerdburgers who hate fun. Which is honestly fair enough, because how could you not Honestly, on how many other laptops, maybe you don't care about it, maybe you don't find it cool, but on how many other laptops is the keyboard the GPU, but the screen the rest of the computer? Graphics card. And speaking of the keyboard being the GPU, the key switches are really nice. And although at first glance, the trackpad is kind of Tidgy, as I'd call it, it's actually one of the high points of the machine. It's really nice. Please excuse the microphone. But there are some weird things with this laptop too, like the fact that, presumably because the person it was bought from just left it in storage for a while, it forgot that the batteries could hold a charge. Obviously, the batteries have been significantly degraded, and at some point I will probably replace them. But in software, it got as low as thinking that it was only holding 6 watt-hours of battery compared to the supposed 80 when it was brand new. But I've got 2 questions then. How do I know it's wrong? And if I do know it's wrong, how do I fix the fact that it's wrong? Well, the way that I know that it's wrong is because there are 2 commands you could run. Rocking out. 2 commands depending on what OS you're on, and those will, they'll query the battery and then say in a fairly easy to comprehend way how much capacity it's meant to have and how much capacity it does have, along with a few other things like whether it's charging and stuff. But how do I know it's wrong? Well, because sometimes it would be as high as 25, or 12, or just 6, or somewhere in between. It would be changing really often, and some variance is normal. The laptop isn't exactly sure how much capacity it's got. It's almost guessing. It is measuring, but not super exactly, but it shouldn't vary that much. So that's how I know it's wrong, but how do you fix it? The answer was pretty much just cycle it a lot and the laptop will learn. So I was cycling the screen and the keyboard because they got 2 different batteries, cycling just the screen, cycling just the keyboard as much as possible. So they do have to be connected for the keyboard to be doing anything, but I could tell the GPU and the keyboard to work really hard while the CPU and the screen's doing nothing. So it's mainly the keyboard battery being cycled. And then I would do other stuff. Like I honestly do not know if this was helping. I was just trying to think of methodology. I tried discharging it from 100 to 50, then charging it up to 75, going down to 25, up to 50, down to 0. Just hoping that, giving it some context for how long it takes to charge and how much energy it needs to intake or lose to go from what percentage to another percentage. I honestly don't know, but I assumed it helped. And regardless of whether my special method was part of that or not, it does seem to have been fixed. So now it generally varies anywhere from 22 to 29 watt-hours-ish. Very shockingly, the detaching screen has given me almost no problems, which is just impressive. The only thing I've actually had go wrong is that when I attach it, sometimes the keyboard will appear straight away, but the trackpad will take a few seconds to appear. Other nice things are that Windows Hello is actually... It's just about fast enough to be worth using while in Windows, but it's not an option in Linux right now. And the Wi-Fi, it's not an Intel chip, and it's not Wi-Fi 6. It's actually a Marvell chip, which are known across the internet for being awful. But the only comparable wireless performance I've had in my bedroom, which is on the exact opposite side of the house to the router, has been an Apple Mac Mini. It's perfectly capable of 300 megabits per second down, which is slower than my internet connection, so I know it's being bottlenecked by the Wi-Fi, not the connection. And the Mac Mini can fully saturate my half a gigabit connection. But my phone only gets 200 and most of the things are left about 100. It's been really stable, but out of the box, things are less good, especially on Linux. When I first tried it, well, with no optimizations, just having it on balanced performance to battery life, nothing else done to it, barely even anything installed, battery life was about half that of Windows 11. And even though I wasn't actually considering daily driving Pop! OS because I do not like the desktop environment and it's based on Ubuntu, but I tried Pop! OS because I heard it has a lot of gaming-focused optimizations, and this laptop has an NVIDIA GPU and an Intel GPU. So I thought maybe it might be a graphics thing. There are quite a few laptops that come with Pop! OS pre-installed, so maybe it has some laptop-focused tweaks, and it does, actually. The battery life was significantly better on Pop! OS than it was Fedora, but it was still like 20% worse. At least that's how things were when I wrote the original notes for this video. But that 20% worse figure was with my GPU in the background, just always on, doing nothing but consuming lots of power. Once I figured that out with some help from the people in the Matrix chat, then I actually managed to beat Windows battery life by a fairly significant margin. However, one place where Fedora absolutely blows away Pop! OS is just how good it is to use on a laptop. Pop! OS uses X11, which is fair enough if you just want the most amount of compatibility, but Wayland just works better, in my experience. And not only that, but it has more features. Pen input, which is important if you have a Surface Pen, works properly. The gestures work properly, so you don't need an extra GNOME extension to install stuff like Pop! OS does by default. And the mouse cursor looks nicer. Also, you need Wayland for proper touchscreen support. If you go and scroll in an app that's in X11 mode, you're just going to select things. Same goes for in Firefox. If you want to pinch and zoom, doesn't work on X. Same goes for trackpad gestures. You want to slide with 2 fingers to the side to go back or forward, doesn't work on X. Also, and that's another thing against Pop! OS, you can switch Pop! OS to Wayland, but the apps don't do that by default. Fedora comes with Firefox in Wayland mode and the whole OS in Wayland mode. And it's mainly going to be the browser where you're going to feel most of the touchpad gestures. That's probably where you're doing most of your pinch and zoom in and things like that. Something that you absolutely should know if you are genuinely considering buying one of these is that, especially if you're buying it used, which you can't buy them new anyway, don't let Windows Update get its hands on your laptop until you're certain that you don't want to undervolt. Basically, there's something that the tech community likes to call the silicon lottery, where every individual CPU is made to a certain standard of performance, but there's actually a range of different voltages and clock speeds that CPU could handle. It's just that the ones that are on the higher end of that are actually limited, so they fit within that performance stack, and the ones that go below are the ones that get bent down to lower models. And so you might have a CPU that can actually handle lower voltages than Intel or AMD says it should, while still maintaining the same amount of performance. That'll save you power, that'll mean less heat is output, which means fans are quieter, and you'll still be getting the same amount of performance. So why wouldn't you do it? Well, because it can, in rare cases, cause security problems, which it does make me feel a little better that this problem has quite a fun name. It's called Plundervault, which I quite like. But what I don't like is that when Microsoft issued a firmware update to fix it, you can't roll it back, which is particularly annoying because it's not like this would be affecting regular users. Normal people do not downgrade their firmware. So Microsoft would not be hurting regular people's security by adding the ability to downgrade. Wait, did I adding? No, with this they took it away. Like, you used to be able to downgrade for firmwares that you wouldn't want to downgrade for. But as soon as Microsoft adds something that people don't like, they stop you from going back to the one you do like. It's just embarrassing. Embarrassing, unlike, I do have to give them props, the Surface Pen. It's metal other than the top, which is plastic. It's got a nice little clicky bit. It's just a nice pen. I don't really have much context around it. I've very few times used an Apple Pencil and a few other digital styluses for like drawing tablets, but it's nice enough. It's the most responsive I can imagine a pen feeling on a 60 Hz display, which is what this laptop has. So I'm happy with it and it feels nice. Similarly nice for a 2022 laptop is the I/O, which makes sense because it's a 2017 laptop. It's got 2 USB Type-A's, an SD card reader, which I appreciate, the Microsoft Connect port, a USB Type-C, and a headphone jack that's on the screen. That's pretty nice. It's got all the essentials that I need, and I can upgrade that down the line by just using a USB-C hub. Also, just talking about the charger, I mentioned in the previous video about this laptop that I think it's just pathetic, frankly, that the Surface Dock costs so much. However, I do have some notes about the charger itself. I am quite a fan, and the amount of force it's got keeping it in there is actually pretty good. It shouldn't come out by accident, but it definitely will come out if someone trips over it. But there's a weird problem where, because it was exam week a little bit ago, so I left my laptop at home rather than bringing it with me, and so I kept the charger plugged into the wall, but the laptop wasn't plugged into it. If you leave the charger plugged into the wall for too long, and then plug it into the laptop won't charge. So right now the laptop is plugged in, but nothing's on the light. That's the plug for it. If I unplug this and then pause the recording on my phone, and now it's been about 1.5 minutes. I'm going to try and keep the thing in frame while I plug it back in. There we go. Also, just a really nice thing about carrying this laptop with you is that the charger has a USB-A port on it. It's not fast. It's just, I'm pretty sure, just a 5-watt USB-A port. But it's fast enough. I can charge my smartwatch off it. I can charge my phone overnight. It's fine. And it just means I have to bring one less cable with me. And you might think, well, just use USB-C, but getting a fast USB-C charger isn't cheap, particularly yet. And so, yeah, you can charge the laptop overnight on a 20-watt charger, but it's nice that I don't have to spend the money on getting a nice 100-watt USB-C charger while still being able to at least only bring one plug, if not just one cable, for all of my things. Though I am a bit disappointed that that port doesn't have a data connection to the laptop. I understand that it's already got Type-A ports, and you could already be using a USB-C hub if you wanted more, and that it's only USB 2 and that the point's just for charging, but that Microsoft Connect port does data. That's what the Surface Dock is. So it would have been nice if you could just plug a flash drive into the charger while it's plugged into the laptop. I don't see why they didn't do that other than cost cutting, or they never thought about it. Because it's not like having a single USB 2.0 port would be cutting into the sales of the Surface Dock. Also, earlier, I mentioned in the little cutaway how my battery life woes were solved with Linux and how Linux actually does outperform Windows now in terms of battery life. But that doesn't mean the battery life was particularly good yet, which tells me one of two things. Either this battery was faulty, or someone abused it. It only had 384 cycles on it, which isn't particularly low, but isn't high enough that I would expect half of the capacity to be gone. But there was also a much more serious problem. As soon as I went to actually use this laptop for something high-powered, so actually using the GPU in the base, or even sometimes just using the CPU to its fullest, the laptop would just disconnect one of the batteries. It would just say 0%, which is a problem because the reason I wanted this laptop was not as a desktop replacement. It's not meant to be that powerful, but I at least want it to make me confident that I can be away from the wall and still not have to worry too much about what I can do on my laptop. And that's what this laptop can do now, because I ended up replacing the battery. I didn't actually record the first time I did that, but I did record me replacing the adhesive once the proper adhesive finally arrived. I want you to take note of the really strange feet on this laptop, and that's not how I did it. I honestly don't know what the previous owner of this laptop did, because the feet are still on the laptop, but some of it has been ripped off, but then there are circular holes in the feet that are like, that line up with the holes under it. So I don't know how this happened, but it wasn't me. Which leads me to believe that this laptop has been taken apart before. Because of that, though, replacing the battery was much easier for me. It required very little heat, and after about 15 minutes of guitar picking and card swiping, I got it replaced. With the battery replaced, typically, because of the lost capacity on the screen battery as well, because it's the keyboard battery I replaced, I have about 73 watt hours of the total 80 that this laptop would have brand new, so I'm pretty happy with that. But how does it actually perform in real-world use? Well, one day, just because this was the day I chose to record my usage with it. I used it for about 4 hours, split up into 4 different sections. The first was light document editing, so fairly bursty typing but with lots of idle time. I used a combination of LibreOffice and Firefox, and it was fine. Hour 2 was much more heavy document editing, including detaching the screen a few times to draw some diagrams, reattaching it. There was just a lot more typing with a higher screen brightness, and it turned out that I hadn't even remembered to disable my NVIDIA GPU yet, since this bit was on Linux. By contrast, the next 2 hours were in Windows. Why? Because Adobe has not only successfully infiltrated the real professional creative market, but also the aspiring professionals to be. Thank you so much, Adobe. You're so great. So, hours 3 to 4 were a mix of Microsoft PowerPoint, Adobe Premiere, and some document editing, as well as quite a bit of idle time, but I never let the laptop go to sleep or the screen turn off because I was writing things down in pencil, making changes to an edit I had going. It was an interesting process, but I was going hard in Premiere while I was doing it, along with using 4K footage, so the laptop was being taxed fairly heavily and the screen brightness was about half. After those 4 hours, I had about 36% left, which I am very happy with, considering I only started the day on 92. I know that it's just what having a nice laptop is like, but it feels so freeing to know that I can actually be away from my computer wherever I am, while still having enough performance that I don't have to worry about the software I'm going to use, and enough endurance that I don't have to worry about how long I want to use it for. This laptop will get me through what I need it to in a day. So overall, knowing that I could still swap this laptop if I didn't like it and I had no money out of pocket, I could just get a different one if I wanted to. Do I regret getting it? No. Hell no. It's got a really nice combination of cool factor. Like, look at the hinge. Are you not just a little bit shallow enough to like the hinge? While also managing to be really practical. The battery life is perfectly good enough for me with that replaced battery, and even probably mostly without it. The keyboard is really nice to type on, and the touchscreen and detaching screen proved far more useful than I thought they would be. I'm really happy with this laptop, and if you want a premium feeling laptop without buying something super modern in the thousands of pounds, then this is something that I would say you should take a look at, see what they go for used near you. The only time where I would say no, don't even consider it, is if you are hardcore into gaming. You might think with the GTX 1060 that you could get away with playing some games on it, and you can if you're willing to temper your expectations. The GPU does perform up to how I would expect it to. However, even games that you could run at 4K on this GPU will not run at that. Minecraft, if I run it on the integrated GPU, the Intel GPU, can run at higher than the refresh rate of this screen at 4K. But if I let it use the GTX 1060, which is far more powerful, it runs at like 20 to 30 FPS. And I think that's a bottleneck caused by the GTX 1060 having to send its work over to the Intel GPU to be outputted to this display, but I'm not entirely sure. It's consistent between Linux and Windows, and if you're hardcore into gaming, you should pass on it. But if you're willing to turn the resolution down, even if you could be running the game at 4K in theory, then it does do it just fine. So, given the amount of gaming I do on this, given I have a proper computer, I'm still happy with it, but that's something you should know. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and sorry I made you wait so long for it. Subscribe if you would like to, and bye.